Hi, everyone. Hope you're having a good day today. I thought I would just start by giving a brief introduction of who I am and what I'm doing in the space of education. So my name is Kavita Singh, and I run a company called FutureWorks Consulting, which is a career and college counseling firm for students who want to go to top tier institutes abroad. Before I started FutureWorks, I was basically in the corporate world. I was a marketing strategy consultant, and then I was in marketing. I lived in the US for a long time, and it was really exciting and fun, and we did really great work. But I think nothing is as satisfying as really imparting education to others. Because I'd worked in the corporate world, always in new product development and innovation. Particularly, I started focusing a lot on innovation training. I got really interested in the space of education, and I decided I wanted to start my own venture, which is when I came back to India and started FutureWorks. In addition to starting FutureWorks, I've just started a new venture as well called Skill with Us, which is for people who want to get into non-traditional careers and non-traditional work arrangements. So they may want to work from home, or they may want to start a small business. Or they may want to be self-employed or freelance, and they're looking for careers that are not the traditional becoming a doctor, lawyer, engineer, but maybe they're interested in doing something like starting a coaching business, or becoming a chef, or becoming a home caterer. So that's something that we've just started, and I'm really excited about that as well. So that's just a little bit about myself, which I thought I'd share with you. We've already got some great questions in, so I thought I would start by answering some questions. One of the questions that I thought I'd start with is somebody who sent in a question saying, "What is the best experience you've had while teaching?" And I thought I'd cheat a little bit by actually providing two experiences, because I've actually had a lot of great experiences. So it's hard to pick just one. So I would say the sort of the two best experiences I've had while teaching are similar, but different. So let me take the first one. So the first one was a student who came to us when he was in class 10, and he was looking to study abroad. At that time, his grades, mark sheet had C's and D's on it. Even though he was a bright student, his mother and him both felt he had a lot more potential. And in the process of sort of working together, because the way we work with students who want to look at going to top tier institutes abroad is we really try to find what they really want to do and help them build up a really interesting profile that'll be good for them in general, but also be very helpful for them obviously in the application process. Because we were able to identify what really made him passionate, and then showed him ways to do these things. So he was really interested, like a lot of young kids are, in getting into business eventually. He came from a family that had a small to medium sized business, and he really enjoyed talking to his parents about business and work, and so it was something that he was passionate about, but he didn't know what to do with it, and kind of how to take that forward. And so we came up with a couple of different project ideas from things that he told us as we talked to him and we talked to his parents. One was he was very inspired by a friend of his grandfather's, who was a German lady, living in China actually, and she was working a lot on how to build relationships between China and other countries, including India. So very interesting work. And so we came up with this idea where he would create a school exchange program between in his school and schools in China. And because of this person that he knew, he was able to get access to the Chinese embassy. And in this whole process, we came up with this idea for an exchange program. And in this whole process, he had to go around actually presenting to the ambassador, and the person involved in this thing was the basically the attaché for trade. And his whole confidence level went up immediately, because we were helping him put this together, doing mock interviews, helping him practice, monitoring what he was doing. And his confidence level went up tremendously. And that started to show in his grades. So suddenly, from a kid who was scoring, C's and D's, he became a student, in 2 years that was all A's, with a couple of A stars actually on his mark sheet. And I think that was really inspiring to say, sometimes kids aren't doing as well, not because because they have an issue, but they don't feel confident, they don't feel motivated. And that was a really great experience to see how much that could sort of change a student's life. uh, the second example is similar but different. So one of the things that we try to do, as I mentioned in the process, is really identify, what a student is interested in. So we had another student who told us, she was really interested in psychology and also in volunteerism, and her top choice school was UPenn, which is a great school in the US. And so we started to tell her, do you know how UPenn is different when it comes to psychology? And we told her about the Center for Positive Psychology and maybe how she could do a really interesting project in that area given her interests. And she went and looked it up, and she loved the idea. And worked on it. And what's actually absolutely fascinating right now, because we worked with a student a few years ago, is she's done a master's now, also from UPenn, focused on this subject, and she's planning to apply for a PhD, also focused on the same area. So sometimes what you do, early on, can really transform someone and give them, basically their entire career choice or meaning in their career. So that those two experiences are really exciting. Finding what really makes someone motivated, and then helping them kind of achieve that path. I'm going to look at another one of the questions. Just give me a moment. Um, so then there was another question saying, being an owner of such elite classes, I'm assuming you know a lot about your students, or at least notice a lot and try to help. So what was the most depressing thing a student has come to you about, and how did you deal with it? And that's a great question, because you're absolutely right. When you're working closely with students and parents, and you're working in this sort of very customized one-on-one fashion, you get to know a lot about a student beyond just their sort of academics, and you hear a lot about their problems. And it's important to figure out how how you deal with it. So there's some cases where honestly it's very hard to deal with, and it probably needs professional help. So there are some cases where we have come across instances where somebody probably needs a psychologist to come in and help, and it's important to identify that and tell the parent and get that help, because you don't want to inadvertently do something wrong or give the wrong advice, because you may not be qualified to provide that advice. But to answer the question more directly, we've had this actually incidents in about 3 or 4 cases where the student was a victim of sexual assault. Um, which is a difficult issue to deal with. So it's in those cases, the incidents had already happened. The parents were aware of it. In some cases, there had been a lot of support from the family, and some they hadn't been, because there'd been a lot of denial. And they were all getting help in some form. So we didn't need to sort of step back and say, we need to report this incident or do something about it. But it was about being supportive, to the student, understanding that they had a lot of issues and insecurities as a result of this, these experiences that they have had, and giving them that confidence and motivation, being very encouraging, and helping them move forward, rather than focusing on the negative emotion that obviously they would feel. So it's just the tone in which you deal with a student, as well as making sure they constantly feel comfortable and secure in the environment that you're in with them, and they continue to share anything that they feel. So there you're sort of almost beginning to play the role of a like a mentor, to try to help them, as they might be dealing with difficulties that they face. And also because we're working with them on applications where they may be talking about personal stories and things that they've been through, is letting them know that it's safe to talk about these things in applications. It's nothing to feel ashamed about at all. And the courage that you have had to come up with to deal with it is something that you should be proud to talk about, and it's an important trait that you have. So I would say that's probably been the most difficult, but there are many other incidents that come up, where students have faced a lot of difficulties. And as I said, making sure, if that's something that's ongoing and nobody's aware of it, making sure that you're getting them the help they need, if you're not qualified to provide it, is actually important. um, then there were a couple of questions around, what do you need to do if you want to become a teacher, in terms of the qualification or the degree that you should get. If you want to become a teacher in India, then there are a number of different kinds of qualifications depending on where it is that you want to teach. So if you want to teach sort of nursery and junior school, then a diploma in education is sufficient. But if you want to be able to teach all the way up to class 12, then you would need to get a B.Ed. And often people push you to do a master's in education because eventually promotions, becoming a principal, things like that. They look for teachers who have a master's in education. So assuming you want to be a school teacher, then those are the qualifications you need. If you're looking to teach at a college or a university level, then you're going to be looking to do a PhD, because you're going to become proficient in an area, and you're going to be looking to become a lecturer. So it would depend on which area that you want to teach in. But if you're looking to teach in a college or university, then you would be looking to do a PhD. The other question around this whole area was not just about the degrees, but what kind of skills you require for teaching as a career. So for teaching as a career, it's important, obviously, that you build knowledge in the subject area that you're teaching, and that's less of a skill, but but you do need to be able to be knowledgeable about that area and constantly be adding to that knowledge, because things keep changing. So that becomes important. So if you are teaching at a school level, you would do a B.Ed with a specialization in the area that you would want to focus on. In terms of other skills, I think it's important to have good communication skills, because you are trying to often take very complex subjects and break them down into ways that are easy for a student to understand. So communication skills become important. The ability to take something complex and break it down into steps is another thing that's important. I think you need strong skills in terms of empathy, because your students will all be quite different potentially. So being able to empathize, understand where a student is coming from, where are they struggling, is something else that's important. And facilitation is another really important skill. So if you're in a classroom environment, then you don't only want to be the person you don't only play the role where you're providing knowledge to a student, but you also want to be facilitating discussion. So you want students to be able to come up with ideas, to help them think about how do I deconstruct these ideas, to encourage discussion between students in a constructive manner. So facilitation becomes also a critical skill to learn and develop over a period of time. Um, Depending again on what it is that you're trying to do, actually being able to develop curriculum would be another skill that could be very interesting to develop. If you are in a system where the curriculum is developed, and there's little scope to add more to that curriculum, then you may have difficulty utilizing that skill. But in many cases, curriculum development itself is important. If you're starting something on your own, then you would need to develop your own curriculum or process in order to be able to teach students. And if you are in a university kind of environment, then there's a lot more opportunity to develop curriculum than there is in a school environment, which might be already set by the board. Some schools are much more liberal, because they're especially in junior years, not in class 10 and 12 as much, where you're studying for board examinations. But in some of those years, they're experimenting, trying new things. So there's much more opportunity there to actually develop curriculum, and so that can be obviously very interesting and exciting. So those were a few questions around the education and the skills you need to become a teacher. Uh, then another question was, what is the weirdest thing a student has said to you? It's a good question. I don't know if it's the weirdest, but we've had a lot of discussion with both students and parents as to how much work we should be doing versus how much work the student and parent should be doing. So there's a lot of discussion around plagiarism. So we've had instances where somebody has said, but if I send you bullet points and then you turn it into an essay, it's my essay. And so it's strange because, or it's weird because I think the sometimes the concept of what is plagiarism isn't very clear to to students and parents. And so we've had to explain, well, no, that is not actually something that we can do, because we will guide and help you to put something great together, and that's a lot more work, and we're happy to do that extra work. But just sending us bullet points that we're going to turn into an essay is actually something that's actually not possible for us to be able to do. So you will deal with a lot of these kinds of issues in the when you're teaching students, as depending on what kind of work that you're teaching. Um, uh, so it's important to constantly emphasize what your role is, how much you can help them, and as well as what their role is. And while it sometimes might be easy for it might seem easy to take some of shortcuts, and I've seen people do that, and it takes a lot more to explain to a student why you shouldn't be doing something like this. It's great, because when they understand it and they get it, then you've again changed something very dramatic about them. So we've had a lot of weird questions around things like that. um, then there was actually a very interesting question around burnout, and a person basically said, and I said, I'm in my fourth year of teaching middle school language arts. I've taught classes 6, 7, 8, ELA, communications, media literacy, digital citizenship, and ALP English, and I'm starting to feel burnt out. I also participate in extracurricular activities on the side to stay involved in the district and community. What advice do you have for young teachers that feel like they've burnt out? Also, do you have any recommendations on grad school? There's a lot of pressure to go back to school, and I've yet to find a master's education degree program that I want to fork out that kind of money for, especially when I'm feeling burnt out. It would be nice to do something that would allow me to step out of the classroom a few years, but stay on in the educational field. What do I do? So it's a great question, because burnout is something that can definitely happen in obviously any field, but also in education, which I think people who aren't in education, who aren't teachers, may not understand it so much. You are dealing, with a lot of individual students, trying to motivate them, dealing with problems that they are facing. So you're taking on, a lot of the emotions that and issues and problems of a whole host of young students. And so burnout can happen, and it does happen to a lot of teachers. You're grappling with all kinds of potentially ethical issues, pressure that happens now in the educational system across the world, where there's a lot of there's a lot of pressure from potentially from parents who may be asking a lot of questions around why their child isn't doing so well, and they may want to be appropriating blame to sometimes the educator, because they don't want to believe that their kid is potentially struggling. So you're dealing with a lot of those kinds of things, and so burnout does happen, and I completely understand and empathize with it. If you are looking to stay in the field of education, but you perhaps do not want to be a teacher, you could, and the field of education is great. As I said, I really enjoyed it, and I've been on both the side where I'm actually the counselor, as well as I'm the business person around it. You could move a little bit more into the business side potentially, of the education field. So perhaps you're not the person doing the teaching as much, but you are putting something together. It could be your own organization, or you could join a company which is providing education to students. And there are a number of different areas where especially in India, there's a lot going on in the private education space, which is interesting. So there are people providing private education in terms of K to 12 teaching. There are people providing education from an extracurricular activity basis. There are people providing education services from a test prep basis, so helping people prepare for competitive exams. There are people providing educational services for things that are not being kind of taught in school. So things like, for example, coding, which is not really being taught in school, and is a great area because it's a new upcoming space. Some of these are, could be small companies. Some of these are physical spaces. Some of these are online platforms, like the one I'm starting, though it's in a slightly different space. And so you could perhaps potentially, if you find the area of business interesting, move over to the business side of it, and still be involved in education, and make sure that there's a lot of role to play in the business side, because it's about creating the right product for the right target group, and making sure that you're creating a product that's really engaging and is really providing high quality, and so it can be a really interesting space. So that's potentially one area that you could kind of get into if you're feeling kind of burnout. You could also get more into research. So there is perhaps if you're looking for a master's in education, you don't look at the master's so much from a teaching perspective, but you look at saying, what could I do in the field of research? There's a lot of scope to look at saying, what teaching pedagogy or methodologies could be more effective, what could really help work to be much more engaging, what is working, what isn't. So one of my counselors, actually, she's now actually going off to do her PhD, but she worked with me. She was absolutely fantastic, very very smart young woman. She did this research where she looked at private education in slums. So interestingly, we have private education happening in supplementary private education, so basically tuitions happening in across the board in India, and even in slums, people are willing to put that money, because they feel, if my child can get a better education, I am very happy to put that money aside. And there's only been one study done in that area, which shows actually the quality of what's being produced is actually good. It's low cost, but it's providing, it's providing outcomes. So you could also look at going into sort of the field of research, and really create some interesting knowledge around that. For that, you would want to do a master's degree. Even for business, you might want to look at doing a master's degree. It's not necessary, but you could. So those are a couple of areas that you could potentially explore if you're essentially wanting to be in the field of education, but not necessarily wanting to be a teacher. You could also get into much more the content and curriculum development side of it. So you're not the teacher who's actually doing the teaching, but you're working more in terms of content and curriculum development, especially for a private organization that is constantly creating content and curriculum. So those are sort of some ideas of what you could potentially get into, and yet still stay in the field. Just give me one sec. I'm just checking to see what the other questions were. So there was another question, which was, I just want to say that what you guys are doing is much needed around the world, and we thank you. It's very nice. Thank you. How can I make a difference or start something like your program? So firstly, thank you very much for that question. Um, so, uh, so, so in terms of starting something like our program, which is basically private coaching for students who are looking to study abroad, what I think would be great for you to do first is to say, what's my skill set? Where is it that I believe I have these skills to kind of make a difference? Is it in the space of study abroad? Is it that my English skills are great, and I can really help people to improve their writing, because that's a critical need. I'm an engineer, and I could potentially help students to code, assuming that it is that you actually want to be the person who's teaching. So basically, finding a gap in the market, and saying, what is it that's not being done well enough in school, that people would pay extra for outside school, and people would spend time outside school also to do it. So both are important. You want people to have the time to be able to and take these classes, and think that it's important enough to take these classes. So the first step would be about maybe coming up with a few different ideas of where is it that you think your skills kind of match. If you don't intend to be the person who's actually doing the coaching and the counseling or the teaching itself, but you want to set up a business around it, you'd look at what kind of potential gaps there are in the market, and you could always hire faculty. So you could hire your teachers to provide these services. That would be the first step. So brainstorming, coming up with those ideas, looking at then what's in the space, seeing what are the competitors, how can you create something that's different. So sometimes it's about providing kind of higher quality services. Sometimes it's about providing the same service, but maybe it's just not being it's not effective enough because it's not being delivered in an interesting way. So coding is a great example of that I've seen in the market, where there are these programs, but they're sort of being done in a kind of a boring way, especially for young kids. So if you can make it exciting and creative and put projects in there that they can feel proud to have created, uh, you know, then then students get much more engaged. So the first step would be to brainstorm ideas. The second would be to kind of filter them down and say, given my skill set, given the gap in the market, given what I find is really interesting, which ones might what I want to do, and then go about actually developing your product. I actually have a class on this on my platform, which goes into, it's about a 1.5 hour class, which goes into a lot more detail. So if you wanted to take that, it's still free for the next day. Please go to www.skillwithus.com and take the class if you find it interesting. In terms of creating a program exactly like ours or similar to ours, the way to sort of go about it is to say, which countries am I focusing on, because the admissions process is very different for different countries. And I'll give you an example. So for the UK, except for Oxford and Cambridge, it's largely your school grades and your statement of purpose and the recommendations that they look at. And there are certain grade requirements that you have to meet to get in. And if you don't get in it, if you don't have those grades, then you don't sort of stand then they're not going to consider you. With Canada, it's much more grades than anything else. In some cases, they have a few essays, but they're fairly short, so they're really looking at your grades. When it's the US, the application process is much more complex because they basically look at a holistic application process. So they're saying, your grades are important. They also expect you to take some competitive exams, which is the SAT or the ACT. So your grades plus these other examinations are important, but we're not saying that there's a cutoff. We're not saying that you have to have, a 95% or above. It's more of a range. So if you're in this range, then we will consider you. And you could be at the bottom of the range and get in because you have such an interesting profile and you've done so many interesting things. But if you're at the top of the range and you haven't, done a lot aside from getting good grades, you may not get in, and the other person might. So it's really about saying that, what role am I playing in this with the student to help them identify what can make them stand out? How can I actually help the student build up this profile, and then eventually help them in the application process. So the process is quite different. So first, if you're looking to set up a business which is about helping people study abroad, it would be important to say, what country am I focusing on, because you would need to, your product line might be quite different. The other thing you would want to say is, am I focusing only on elite schools or am I focusing across the board? We decided to focus only on elite schools because we felt that there was a big need in that area, and that's where you needed more qualified people at that time, at least, to come into the market and provide these services. But you could pick any segment of the market that you feel that you can add value in. So that's the second sort of decision that you would basically need to make. And once you've made those decisions, then you can say, okay, what are the services that I want to provide? So because we focus on the top schools and because it's so much about profile building, we have very extensive services that we start working with students potentially from class 9, and it's a fairly intensive process. You could say, I'm only going to focus on helping people, I'm a great writer, I'm only going to focus on helping people put their application essays together, for example. So you could focus on the entire process, or you could decide to focus on part of it, depending on where you feel your skills are the strongest. So then you would basically put your package of services together. And once you've sort of decided that, then it's really about saying, okay, how do I actually go and get clients in this area? The way it works is it's a lot of word of mouth, and word of mouth works very well in this space. So what did I do? I went out and first told most people I knew that I was doing this business, because a lot of them had friends who would have kids in this, in the kind of schools that we were targeting, who were looking to study abroad. So I dropped off, brochures and pamphlets at friends' houses and in neighborhoods around me, and started to get actually my first few clients. The second thing I did was I was selective actually about who I took on as clients, because I think that made a difference in terms of building trust and credibility, that we weren't just taking anybody, because we were looking at elite schools, and not everybody has the resume or can build the resume to apply to an elite school. So we created a selection criteria, which for us, because of our focus, was important. And then we really made sure that we were delivering very high quality. And that's where word of mouth came into play really well, because people would come to us for one meeting and feel that, yes, I can really trust this person. I know that they're going to be very honest with me. They're going to really work hard in helping me in this application process. And immediately they would start sending more clients to us. One way that we sort of built up this trust was by being very honest in our evaluation. So if a student really didn't have the grades, and wouldn't get into an elite institution, we told them that it wouldn't be possible. We could help them get maybe into the next rung of institution, which is still a good school, but maybe not, the top 5 or top 10, and what it would take to do that. And also, be encouraging and say that, this is something you could look at a post-grad level, or, there are many paths to success, and it's not just about getting into this one elite school. But I think, while it's sometimes a hard message to deliver, I think most people were very happy to know that we weren't just about getting clients and saying nice things to them, and we were very honest about our evaluations right up front, knowing that somebody may not sign up with you simply because you're being honest with them. So that was something that really helped. The other thing that we did was put together a 1.5 hour presentation on the application process. So it was not a sales presentation, but it was a primer essentially on what does it really mean to get into a elite institution, especially in the US, which is a more complex process. And we put that together for two reasons. It's a very different process that a lot of people don't understand. So then as a result, they don't understand how it is that you're going to help them. And as a consequence, it's very difficult for them to evaluate you. So we felt that would be really helpful for both students and parents, as well as it's a great way for them to see, who you are, what your knowledge is, and how you can deliver quality services. And so we did those presentations in schools, and we did the first few that we just did for completely for free. And we also did some for small groups of people who were approaching us, and it became obvious that maybe they didn't understand the process, so we offered to do it for 5-10 people together, who might be a group of friends. And those worked really well because they got a chance to see your knowledge, to interact with you. And again, the people who signed up and were happy, the word of mouth spread. It's not always easy to get access to schools. I was lucky that I had friends that I could ask for contacts, and then they were able to get me into the school, and the school was happy to have somebody come in and provide this information, especially since I was doing it for free. But sometimes you might have difficulty getting into a school because their schedules are really crowded, and it's difficult for them to accommodate you, in the schedule itself. So even if they want to, even if you get in touch with the right person, even if they want to do it, sometimes it's just really hard. So if you find that's the case, then there are other ways of connecting with students and parents. You can contact the heads of, say, PTAs, so parent-teacher associations. You could connect with teachers themselves and kind of offer to do it for their students. You could connect with other people who might be coaching students in a different but complementary area. So we've done the same kind of presentations at coaching institutes that are coaching SAT students for SAT, because they have to do that for the application process. So basically finding kind of where your student is, and doing that can be very helpful in starting to sort of build this word of mouth and starting to build your initial client base. I would say even keep it small for the first year and make sure you deliver great results, because as soon as you have a few great success stories, you will have people immediately, coming to you. And that's what happened with us. So the first year we started fairly late, because I actually just moved back to India at that time. So we started fairly late in the application process in terms of driving awareness about our business. But we worked with some incredible clients, and they did very well. And so everybody was in their school was asking them, "Oh, who did you go to?" And or everybody in that person's company was asking them, "Who did you go to?" And that basically helped us to build that sort of credibility, very very quickly. And the next year, suddenly our numbers, went up tremendously, and then it just kept climbing from there. So that's basically uh, uh, one way that you can start to sort of build a business like ours. You can of course continue to do this kind of business just from home. You may say, I want to be the coach, I want to be the counselor, and I want to be the only person. I don't want to set up an office, I don't want to set up a large business. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. This is a great business to run even on your own. You will of course need to uh, uh, think about the number of clients you can handle a year. That doesn't become too intense or so much pressure that it's difficult for you to deal with, or it stops becoming enjoyable. But so you can do that. So the first year I started, I was working completely out of my house, because I was saying, I'm building this business, I don't want to have all these additional costs. It's stressful, I don't know what's going to happen. And so I started out of my house. And then when I saw that there was a lot of demand, then I moved into an office space, and then I went out and hired people. In the second year, I was still the main counselor. I had now a team of basically sales people and administrative people, and people who could help with research, finding us a lot of information that we might need to kind of look up, which takes a lot of time. But I was still the main counselor. And then after that, I actually started to bring in, because the volume started to become so big, I started to bring in a team of counselors that would work with the students. So you can make this as big or small as you want to. It's a very personal choice. But if you choose to be the main person, the main teacher, the main counselor, you can still have a great business. If you decide to have a larger team, it can also work very well if you have great demand in the space. So there's no compulsion to be big, there's no compulsion to be small. It's a personal choice of what you want to do. It's definitely a great business to run from your house, because people aren't worried about what space they're coming into. Sometimes they actually feel safer and more comfortable from your house. As you build credibility, depending on what kind of coaching you're doing, you can use technology. So a lot of our clients are not, even in India, I have clients in Singapore, in Thailand, in the US, in the UK, and we do everything over Skype, because we don't even need a whiteboard, in our case, because we're not doing sort of whiteboard or blackboard teaching. So you can run this out of your house, just using technology to have all your coaching sessions, depending again on what you're teaching. um, and or you could have students, if you have a small space, or at your dining table you could have students come in for either individually, or for group classes. Both are very possible. And if you're getting students from your neighborhood, then that's even great, because it's easy for them to, the proximity is not a problem. So it's definitely a great business to start from your house. And a lot of people do actually run coaching businesses out of their house. As I said, they take a small space and do it. And so people again are very used to that. So it doesn't, it doesn't seem strange. And if your ambitions become bigger, you decide that you want to turn this into a bigger business, then you can always do so. But there's nothing compelling you to necessarily do that. Just give me a minute. I'm just going to look at the other questions and see what else I should be answering. So there was a question which was not about education, but it was about, do you have any funny or interesting stories from WebMD? Um, So sadly, nothing particularly funny, because we weren't dealing with consumers. It was all a lot of strategic partnerships, or sales that we were doing. So it was fairly serious kind of work that we were doing with other businesses. But WebMD was a great experience, because it was actually in a different way about educating people about health. And what it did do was teach me a lot about, how can you make information interesting to another person. So we had a lot of interactive tools, even slideshows where you had pictures and just a little bit of text. We found people really liked videos were very popular, because being able to see something or see a person is much more engaging than just reading an article. We were Our assessments actually basically were extremely popular and did very well. So most assessments had very low completion rates, but we had something like 85-90% completion rates on our assessments. And the reason was, once we did the assessment, we directed people to very customized information. And that was actually a great learning, saying how can you create some sort of an assessment so that after that, then you can really focus and direct somebody to what they want to do or what they should be learning. So it it's not so much funny or interesting, but it was actually great, because as I said, it was all about educating and learning, just in a different way, on a platform, as opposed to doing sort of one-on-one, kind of customized teaching. But and it was actually a really great brand, and that's where I also learned a lot about trust and credibility. So we never cut corners. So even when we created informational sites on our site that was branded by or sponsored by a client, if there could be an article in there, because this was just something that they were sponsoring. It was our own editorial content. There could be an article in that microsite that might actually have something negative about the brand that was sponsoring it. And in those cases, we wouldn't change anything. We said, if this is true medical content, then there is no reason for us to change it. Just because you're sponsoring this editorial content doesn't change anything. And we had systems and processes in place, saying if you have medical evidence that suggests that this content is inaccurate, that is the only time we would look at it. But as a business person, to business person, this conversation can't take place. It has to take place between our medical directors. So we created these sort of Chinese walls, and we made sure that trust and credibility was a very, very important pillar that would not be broken in any circumstance. And I think that's really actually important when it comes to education. You want to be building that trust. You want to be providing credible information. Where you don't know something, it's fine to admit that you don't know it. And I do that with students. If there's some area that I have a knowledge gap, I'll tell them I don't know it. I can find you either a specialist in that space, or I will go and find that information out for you, because I generally don't have the answer for it. And it's impossible to know everything, so you'll always keep learning. So I think WebMD also got me really interested in the space of education, and it was really a wonderful brand to work with. There's another question on how to add creativity in education, and that's a fantastic question. So I love the whole space of creativity and innovation. So I think one of the things I learned, and I learned this back in another company I'd worked with in the US, which is called Colgate Palmolive, and there we did a lot of innovation training. um, is um, is is basically the environment that you set up. And in that case, we were looking at companies, but I think it's true of schools or any environment that you're setting up. The environment that you set up can encourage or discourage creativity. Now that seems kind of obvious. So what is it about the environment? So what we found, that in a lot of workplaces, and you see that in schools as well, a lot of workplaces, the environment is set up to be very competitive. So I want to do better than you. I want to be top of my class in work, or top of my class in school. And so what it does is, it doesn't encourage people to actually share ideas with each other, because they're all kind of competing with each other. And so creating environments are not just collaborative, but also supportive, where you are actually building ideas together, I think is really important to bring creativity into education, or to drive creativity amongst your students. And that also means that you as an educator are becoming more creative, because you're finding ways to create these sort of supportive environments. So creating, projects where people are, graded not just on their individual contribution, but on how they work with a team, can create that sort of collaborative environment. Which I think is very interesting. So that was, kind of, one very important area. And I think we could do that in workplaces. We can do it in schools. We can do it in colleges. You can sort of do it in kind of any environment. The other way to sort of bring, creativity into education is actually to drive students to be more creative, and sort of bring in processes which get kids to actually think about, how can I brainstorm? How can I solve a problem? And so we had set up some of these sort of brainstorming techniques. And while we initially used them in the workplace, I started to use them even amongst my students. So these were a lot of free-form thinking, saying, how can you come up with, this is the problem you're trying to solve, or if you're trying to come up with a project, these are great ways to think about how to, come up with ideas. And there were about 5-6 different techniques, which I'm happy to share with people if they're, afterwards, if they're interested. And it got people really excited, because a lot of times you think, well, I don't know how to solve this problem, and you're sort of stuck in a certain way, and you use these techniques and they just open up your thinking. And so that's another way to get your students to, again, be more creative, but also become creative in the process of how you're again facilitating this process. And so those are a couple of ways that I think are, really interesting and really exciting ways to, bring creativity into the education space. Another way to try to sort of drive creativity is to do a lot more sort of what I would call student-led learning. So asking students, kind of, how do they want to learn? What do they want to learn about? And sometimes that brings a lot more creativity into the classroom. So a lot of the times, as teachers, we're sort of taking, with the older person, we're taking charge of how we're going to do it. But sometimes it's great to bring the student into that process, and get them to be a little bit more of a guide. And I think that's another really interesting thing. So there are some of these educational systems, like the Reggio Emilia system of education, which is, especially in primary school, they'll get kids to say, what is the problem you want to work on, and then help them. Actually, they're basically playing a role in actually facilitating those problems, and it's very student directed. So looking at those kinds of systems or different systems, and saying, what are people doing in other spaces, and testing them out in small ways, can be really great ways to bring a little bit more of creativity in your classroom, and creativity in your own teaching. And especially if you're kind of burning out, this is something that can become very exciting, because you're trying something new, and it can be very invigorating even for you. So I am just looking to see if there are other questions. Just give me 1 second. So I don't see any additional questions to the ones that I've already answered. So if there are any more questions, please feel free to send them in. Otherwise, I could just potentially talk about a few other things that I think are important or interesting in this space. So let me just take a couple of things that I found kind of interesting. So I think what's really interesting and satisfying about the space of education is the kind of transformation you can make in a child's life. If you're dealing with somebody who's a little bit younger, so and in India it might be true even for a college level, and you're providing sort of supplementary classes, so you're not in the school system itself, and you're doing this sort of tutoring from home kind of a business, then often what becomes important to remember is that you're dealing with the child as well as with the parent. And so making sure you sort of have a system where you can very easily keep the parent updated. So you're not doing sort of double work. You're not teaching the kid and then spending another hour, telling the parent about, what's happened. So keeping them updated and in the loop without bringing the parent completely into the process, because then sometimes you lose the child's attention, because without realizing it, they may sort of overtake the process. So we learned over a period of time that that was really important, and to set up some sort of a system. So we started doing basically monthly sort of reviews, which we would just write up and send to the parents so they could read it. And if there was a very significant issue, we had a whole system of making sure that we informed the parent well in advance that there was a problem, and sat down to kind of try to resolve it. But I think what was really effective was having these sort of monthly review notes being sent, so the parent could kind of keep track of what was going on without it becoming then not about the child. Because otherwise what tends to happen is the child goes into a shell because the parent is now, without realizing it, sort of overtaken the taken the process. So I think that's one of the things that's important when you're thinking of setting up a tutoring business, and you might be doing it from home, and you might be potentially the main person, so your time is obviously important. So you want to make sure that you're using your time as effectively as possible. The other thing I think that's important when it comes to a tutoring business is to, because you're providing a service, and once you've provided your service, it's basically gone. You can't take it back if somebody doesn't pay you. So we set up a system where, because we were working with students in advance, and it's a long process with the milestones are it's hard to divide them into very specific milestones. We set up a process where we took our monies in advance, because the few times we made that exception, unfortunately we got a little bit burnt. And I think most parents understood why we were doing it, and there wasn't much of an objection. So it helped us a lot, because we were never in a position where we were delivering services and not getting paid for it. It also means that it's great because you're not worried about getting cash into the bank, or that you're not there's going to be default on the payment. You can use, if you want to use that money, then to hire more people, or, as I said, move into an office space, or or buy technology tools that will help you in your teaching process. Then you can use that money also to keep investing, and so it kind of gives you that cash flow that you need, which is also good. The other thing that happens often in a tutoring business, depending on the kind of tutoring you're doing, is it could be very seasonal. So it means that you might have a large number of students at a certain time and very few students at others. So if you're doing something where you're coaching students for, say, class 10 exams, then you'll have a lot of people coming to you just before that time, and then after the examination it might be a lull. Sometimes that's great because it works very well with your personal schedule. And so it's fabulous, because you'll have intense periods, and then you'll have, like, a nice break, and it works very well personally. Sometimes it may not work as well, because you want to keep earning evenly month by month. And so another thing to think about is saying, how can you create products or services that will be relevant throughout the year? So if you're teaching kids for very difficult examinations, you could also start creating classes maybe for younger children who need coaching kind of throughout the year. In our case, we were helping students get into competitive colleges abroad. Initially we were helping them only in the last year of their process, which brings a seasonality into it. As we built out services where we were saying that, look, now we can help you from class 9 onwards, it meant that we didn't have as much seasonality. So basically it's fairly even now throughout the year. So depending on what works for you personally, you should it's another thing to potentially take a look at and say, how can I create products that will allow me to have an even cash flow? Or if it isn't that way, I'm actually kind of very happy with it. The other thing to think about is whether whether group classes actually work for you or not. For us, it didn't, because it's all about the individual, and we don't want actually anybody sharing anything about their application process with anybody else. But if you're doing different kind of tutoring, if you can create group classes, then of course that frees up a lot of your time. Depending again on what you can charge, you would look at it saying, if I did an individual class and I can charge X, and if I did a group class and I can charge half that amount, but now I can have 10 students in my class, then you're going to earn a lot more in that time frame. So sort of evaluating, those kinds of things is very helpful. The other thing I would say is, when you're kind of setting up this kind of business, I think a lot of people are very surprised when they hear that me and other counselors are actually very collaborative. So sometimes if we don't have space, we have too many clients, we'll send on our clients to other counselors, or sometimes other counselors say, I'm not as good as this as somebody else, let me send you on to this person, they're more of an expert over here. So while you would normally think, oh my god, this person is my competitor, actually we've developed this really nice community of counselors who help each other out. We invite each other to things like when colleges are coming down, and I might know about something, I would invite the other people, and vice versa. It would be great, actually, I think, if you're starting a tutoring business from home, to see who are other people in the community, or who are other teachers that you might know. You can learn a lot from them. You could potentially share clients. Maybe you're great at teaching a certain subject and they're very good at something else, even if you overlap in some areas, and you are technically competitors. So having that sort of collaborative environment, I think, is really wonderful. It also is really nice to have that support, because sometimes maybe you're dealing with a difficult case, and you don't know what to do. So being able to talk to somebody else who's teaching, who can maybe give you some advice or ideas, can be really helpful. So I remember one counselor saying, they were having some problems with payments, and they were asking me, how do you draw up your client contracts? What are your policies on refunds? And so I shared my documents with them and what we did, which one is happy to do, because you're helping to build this sort of community of people who are all sort of following similar practices. So it helps a lot, because then you're not following different practices, and parents also start getting used to the fact that, hey, this is the norm in the field, and there's this is actually how it's done, and there's a reason, and a very good reason why it's done this way. So if you can find other people, and maybe, I'm sure you can find them in the SHEROES network, in the SHEROES community, which has this fabulous educators community. It's got a lot of people on it. You can find other people that you could use as a peer, where you can get ideas. Maybe, as I said, maybe you will even decide to potentially work together, and provide services together, which I think is which is great. Yeah, you might find a business partner in this community. You might find teachers and faculty that you might want to hire in this community. So I think networking, building those collaborations, even if you never want to, as I said, expand beyond yourself, it can be a great way to sort of bounce ideas of each other. And I think that we found that to be really, really valuable, even with people who, as I said, are technically competitors. So those were just a few sort of words of advice based on experiences that I've had in the process. But I think we're going to be wrapping up in literally a few seconds. So I wanted to thank everybody who has sent in questions. The questions were absolutely wonderful, and thanks SHEROES for inviting me to do this class. And as I said, if you want to take our class, which is free for the moment, go ahead and sign up for it. And if there are other questions that you'd like to ask, I'd be happy to answer them and be supportive. The education field is a very, very satisfying field, and if you find a way to play a role in it, it would be amazing. So we're always happy to support people become educators and teachers. And so thank you very much for having me today. That's and thank you so much for your questions. Take care and good luck. Thank you.